Oh, wait, hold on.
All right, thank you. Last time I followed 20 members from the labor union, and this time a Lifetime Achievement Award and a sheet cake and a Zoom meltdown. So I'm going to keep this really short. I very much appreciated the email SMOLT update from Eric Ettlinger. It's heartening to see some past investments paying off. With this month's water bill, I got my first look at the new rates. I averaged 24 gallons a day and my water cost was less than $10 or about 10% of my bill. Then I imagined that I were a super user and used 400 gallons per day or half a unit per day. I would have used 30 units for a 2-month period. Almost 90% of that would have been at tier 1 rates, and I figure I would have paid $138 for 2 months worth of water. That's about a half cent per gallon or around $2 a day. At these prices, there's really no financial reason not to use 400 gallons a day. I sure hope I'm wrong, but my guess is that our new rate structure alone will not encourage much conservation. What may encourage conservation was another page that was included with my water bill. And it showed a picture of a thirsty landscape and went on to describe the incentives available to users who want to convert an old lawn to something much more attractive. It demonstrated the conservation team and the communication team working together to create an appealing story for turf conversion. I think that'll be covered in more detail on agenda item number 6, but I wanted to thank the folks who put this together for that.
Thanks, Phil.
There are no further speakers.
Okay. I just want to say to the public who's been hanging in there, we've been having some Zoom difficulties, and I think we have cobbled together something that will work tonight. So we appreciate people's patience. Okay, moving on to the next item, which are directors and general managers announcements. I'll start to my right.
None this evening, President Schmidt.
Nothing for me. Thank you.
Okay. Nope. Larry?
There was a district operations committee on Friday, July 21st, and the following activities were discussed. Staff provided an overview of the district dam safety program. Staff provided a review and update of the fire flow improvement program for fiscal years 2022 and 2023. The board reviewed and referred a resolution to tonight's meeting that would authorize the general manager to sign a funding agreement with the California Department of Water Resources to receive state funds for the San Geronimo Treatment Plant emergency generators. The funding is a result of AB Bill 179, which passed in 2022 and designated $1 million in funding for the treatment plant emergency generators and was supported by then Assemblymember Mark Levine. Staff provided an in-depth update on the short-term projects identified in the Strategic Water Supply Integrated Roadmap, including the Phoenix Lake Pond Tempe Reservoir connection and the electrification of the pump station at Sulahuli. Staff also provided information on the committee on proposed contracts for on-call capital maintenance and repair work, as well as the SAP Enterprise Resource Planning computer program and work management system supported by VistaView. The committee referred both items to the August 15th board meeting. The public may view the staff reports or watch a video recording of the July 21st Operations Committee meeting by visiting marinwater.org/calendar. That's it for me.
Thanks, Larry. Ben? Okay. All right. Then with that, we will be moving on to the consent calendar. Can I get a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved. Second.
Are there any public comments on the consent calendar?
There are none.
Okay. With that, could we get a roll call vote, Terry?
Yes. Vice President Kush,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Sampson,
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
and President Schmidt.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that moves us on to item number 5, Pine Mountain Tunnel Tanks Replacement Project Update.
Good evening, Directors. Crystal Yesman, Director of Engineering. I'm going to start off this presentation and then hand it off to Mark Casare, our Construction Engineering Manager. So Tonight, we're going to give you an update on the, well, that's incorrect presentation. Terry,
Sorry.
it's okay. That's the efficiency presentation.
Oh, I apologize. Oh, we're getting excited about that. We're getting excited about that. Okay. Hold on. There you go. And
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're going to give you an update on the Pine Mountain Tunnel Tank Replacement Project, which is scheduled to start construction next week. So just a recap of why we're doing this project. This project will replace the Pine Mountain Tunnel, which is originally built in 1919. It's an 8,700 foot long tunnel that used to provide supply water from Alpine Lake through to Cascade Canyon into the town of Fairfax. But one side is closed up now and we use it as a storage tank. And so it stores approximately 3 million gallons of water, which serves 44,000 customers, over 25% of our customer base. So during our water system planning, master planning efforts, we did a separate study on the Ross Valley water system, and we identified that the tunnel was undersized for fire flow. It's also vulnerable. We knew that it was vulnerable to seismic events and that it has a potential threat to water quality because the tunnel is deteriorating. So we went into design on a project to replace the tunnel with two 2 million gallon concrete tanks. And we have this project in 2 phases. Phase 1 is to prepare the site that was selected for the new tanks and grade the site and remove materials in order to get ready to build the tanks. The second phase of the project is still in design. We're actually at final design review now, and we're hoping to get that second phase project out to bid in the next few months. So next slide, please. So the phase 1 project was awarded last summer, and it involves removing 45,000 cubic yards of material from an area just east of Sky Oaks Road, turnoff from Bolinas Fairfax, on a fire road known as Concrete Pipe Fire Road. And the project will, about the first 15% of the soil is planned to be off-hauled to a landfill because of abundance of caution in order to mitigate any potential spread of phytophthora, which is sudden oak death. And the remaining excavation materials, that's 85% of that material, is planned to be placed at Bullfrog Quarry. We'll construct a 400-foot long, 70-foot tall soil nail retaining wall and install some storm drain improvements and fencing. So that's the phase 1 project. We expect that to take a couple of years to get completed because the construction season is limited because of spotted owl breeding season. So I'm going to pass it off to Mark Casray, our manager for construction engineering, and he's going to give us an update on where we are with the actual start of construction.
Crystal, before we move on, earlier we had heard that there was going to be a lot of the excavation material moving out of that area, either down Bolinas Road or maybe for some other route. Are we still going to be talking about that? Or? Okay.
All right, good evening, board members. Mark Casray, engineering manager of construction. Terry, we can move on to the next slide, please. So yeah, we will be speaking about the off-haul of the soils currently slated for the landfill. The purpose of this presentation, of course, is to discuss that as well as give an update to the board on where we're at. So we have made significant progress in the preparation of starting work on August 1st, so next week. We've completed detailed design with the contractor for the soil nail wall itself. That design has been approved for construction. We've also filed notice of intents with the Water Quality Control Board to operate under the construction general permit. Finished a number of environmental permit requirements with CDFW, or California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Water Board. We held our pre-construction meeting last week on the 18th, and we prepared notifications to the public and established signage throughout the watershed. Next slide, please. So the district was made aware of, or the district is aware of 3 known landslides, of course, on Bolinas Road, and these occurred as a result of the 2023 storm events. And they're within close proximity to our project site. So the worst being about 140-foot landslide that's just a couple hundred feet from Concrete Pipe Road. In recognition of the damaged roadway and the compromised roadway from the landslides, the county has controlled traffic to a single channelized lane controlled by traffic signals and barricades. And that's what you can see here in these lower photos. And the eastbound lane, the ones going down towards Fairfax, are the most compromised, and those would be subject to the loading from the soils with the trucks that we would be taking out from our project site. Thank you. So this is just another slide showing a couple of the landslides and kind of where they are in proximity to our project, just a couple of 100 feet. So it is a concern to us, the impacts of our project and the county. We have been in coordination with the county about their progress, and they've been working diligently to do and execute an emergency contract for the retaining wall that they're planning. They haven't been able to start construction on that yet. So given the condition of Bolinas Road and these landslides, we are concerned about how those might, well, first, how our traffic from our hauling of soil may impact the road, but also how it may impact our project as well. So we're here to present some of the alternatives that we've been considering to continue with the project moving forward. Next slide, please. So as originally planned, we were intending to take approximately 350 truckloads of soil through Bolinas Fairfax Road to get to a landfill. And in recognition of the compromised roadway, we've performed some surveying and orthographic imagery to determine, basically benchmark the existing conditions of the roadway and evaluate it throughout construction. We've taken photographs and video of all of Bolinas Road and our project site. This is out of an effort to be diligent and ensure that there are no impacts from our project as we move forward. We also obtained the opinion of a geotechnical engineer, and what we have found is that the concern is growing and that there is an understanding that the heavy soil loading from our offhaul operation could impact the roadway. So we want to operate carefully. So next slide, please, Terry. And so we've got some alternatives that we've been looking into, and we'll be discussing that now. Next slide, please. So the first alternative is to essentially create a detour for the haul route. You'll recall the original idea was to go down Bolinas Fairfax Road. Under this alternative, we would route traffic south on Concrete Pipe Road, past 5 corners in the watershed, and traverse down Shaver Grade Fire Road, past Phoenix Lake, and out through the town of Ross. We're still considering what impacts this may have on our operation. We anticipate the switchbacks to restrict certain size hauling equipment requiring more trips. Most likely seeing some impacts to the traveling public in the watershed, and also temporary impacts to the town of Ross. And we expect this to occur for about 4 weeks if we were to implement this alternative. Next slide.
Just a quick question. So it would take 4 weeks of hauling.
Yeah, we estimated about 2 weeks of hauling for about 350 trucks through Bolinas Fairfax, but that's using equipment probably twice the size of what we would use under this scenario. So we're about double.
And what would be your season? When would you do that? When would that occur?
So the off-haul was slated for September, and so we are dynamically approaching when that would occur. So the off-haul was slated for September of this year.
One more quick question. Do we have a hard stop date based on the nesting owl season?
Yes, we do. So our construction season is over 2 periods. Commencing August 1st and terminating January 31st. We will also be limited during rainfall events where we cannot work. So we've got a very strict window of when we can perform work, which is why we plan for a 2-year operation.
Thank you.
So
Sorry to keep asking you these questions.
Sure.
But are you wanting to use this alternate route just for the hauling out of material, or would it become a permanent road for the construction of the project?
this would be just for, under this current, sure.
Yeah, it would be just for this project for the movement of the topsoil to the landfill. So we have used this route with heavy equipment in the past. We had an emergency repair of a tunnel where pipelines go at five corners. So we have used this route with heavy equipment. We've also used it for access to Ross Reservoir when we did that large landslide repair. So coming up from Natalie Coffin Green, we did buttress that roadway for that project, which just finished a few years ago. So this route is logistically feasible.
Okay, great. Thank you, Terry. So this would manifest, of course, in closures of trails and roads proximate to our hauling route between the hours of 8 and 5, Monday through Friday. We would, of course, estimate a greater quantity of trucks, more trips per day, and of course, added cost to the project because of that. As we mentioned, the temporary impacts to the town of Ross for approximately 1 month. And we would plan most likely a closure at the fire road at the bridge at Natalie Coffin Green Park. Next slide, please. So that was option 1. Option 2 is to retain the topsoil that was originally slated for offall at our Bullfrog Quarry. So you'll recall that the majority of our soil, the about 35,000 yards, is planned for to be moved to what's known as the Bullfrog Quarry. The photo on the left shows the quarry, and the photo on the right shows that hauling route. So going now westbound on Concrete Pipe Road out to Bolinas, taking a hairpin turn along Sky Oaks Road and going past the ranger station through Bontempi Road, and then ultimately Bullfrog Quarry Road to be placed. Next slide, please.
Just one other comment, we did complete a capital project to install a retaining wall on Sky Oaks Road in preparation for this project that we completed just last winter.
And just touching on the history of Bullfrog Quarry, it was mined in 1948 for drainage blankets and rock faces for the construction of the Bontempi Dam. And has since been used as a equipment and material stockpile yard or a staging yard. And it has been identified as a reuse site for rock and excavation material from tank projects, from tank sites. So this option, of course, would include a close consideration of recognition of the potential contaminants was known as Phytophthora. It's a soil-borne pathogen causing sudden oak death. It's known to kill drones and oaks and watersheds. And in preparation and analysis of this option, we did hire a consultant to evaluate essentially 2 things. One, what was the presence of Phytophthora, if there was any, at Bullfrog Quarry? And then 2, is it feasible to contain this material at Bullfrog Quarry? We did find a couple of positive identifications of Phytophthora cinnamomi at these 2 locations in the quarry. Next slide on that. So it is present at the site, but more importantly, is it feasible to off-all this and contain it at Bullfrog Quarry permanently? And with that report came an identification of 34 best management practices that would essentially prevent the increased transmission of this pathogen, right? So the goal here is to minimize deposition of the soil along the hauling route. So how would we do that? And then how would we confine this material at Bullfrog Quarry? And we can go next slide.
What about sterilizing the soil?
So the consultant that we're working with said that is infeasible. So this can't exactly be sterilized with like a hypochlorite or isopropyl alcohol solution. But what the best management practices were culminating in kind of 2 key areas. One of them was the transport operation, basically. And a few key BMPs there would be to inspect every truck that came and went to ensure that there was no soil on external surfaces, and to make sure they were not overloaded, make sure they're properly covered, and there essentially could be no spillage of this soil through the haul route. There's a number of other best management practices, of course, but these were kind of the highlights. The other one is how the material would be contained at both our quarry, which is essentially a recommendation for a containment where the soil is placed at the quarry and a sandwich of impermeable membranes would be placed over that to prevent infiltration from rainwater, but also to prevent penetration from any plants or trees that may begin to grow there at that site. So the idea is you place an impermeable membrane, you place a fill or a clean material on top of that at a depth of about 18 inches, compacted to a high density, and then place another impermeable membrane on top of that. After that, the option would take the remaining clean fill material and place it as planned at the quarry site.
Are you envisioning diapering the trucks, the trailers, handling it like hazardous waste basically?
No,
Doesn't mean you could. You know, you don't drop hazardous waste on the road.
Yeah.
You know, that would be, go directly to jail.
true. So one of the BMPs, for example, is if soil was found along the haul route, which is possible, it would simply be cleaned up. It's that you just don't want to leave the soil there and to track it through locations in the watershed.
Mark, excuse me, fumigation or disinfection of agricultural soils is fairly common. If you go down to the Salinas Valley, the strawberry fields will be covered with those plastic tarps, and they're basically fumigating that soil prior to planting. So, there are methods, well-established methods for doing that sort of thing. Certainly not involving the types of disinfectants that we would think of, like sodium hypochlorite or alcohol. There are probably good reasons why we cannot apply those same methods here, but I think it'd be really helpful to understand what those limitations are, whether there are restrictions on using those those could be very powerful pesticides, and restricted from using them. There could be other application requirements that we can't meet here. It'd just be good to know because it is a pretty common practice. I believe.
Well, Director Cush, we could pull Sean in. I did talk to him generally about this, and he indicated part of the concern is if there haven't been studies done on the efficacy, it's kind of hard just to do it and try it. Specifically, I said, well, let's just ask, and Mark noted the consultant on sodium hypochlorite, if we have that, and they said, for whatever reason, no, that won't work. It's a pretty hardy sport, can stay for years, if not decades, and come back. So I don't know the details, but Sean may have a better answer.
Could we maybe get through the presentation and then go to that? Because she has to stop the presentation.
And Director Cush, we can certainly look into that further and include that as part of our evaluation of some of these options. Next slide, please, Terry. And we don't want to discount the impacts that Phytophthora is known to cause. It has been found at other locations along the watershed, causing tree mortality. The photo shown here is a tree stand near Lake Lagunitas that has been impacted by the Phytophthora pathogen. And this alternative would require a change order to append these best management practices to our contract so that we can, of course, hold our contractor to the expectations of this procedure if we were to go this route. Next slide. So the third option is not ideal. The third option would be to delay this project. We estimate a 2-year delay if we were to make this decision, mainly out of function of the county's landslide projects, estimated at 1 year to 18 months. Based on our construction window of August 1st to January 31st, we could see a delay of up to 2 years or more. It's entirely a function of when the roadway is functional again. And, we feel that it would be safe to offhaul this amount of soil down Bolinas Road. Delaying the project would of course result in significant cost impacts to the district as a result of delay claims and inflationary escalations. And we would most likely, if we took this route, terminate the contract and issue a formal solicitation to rebid the project. And this would help ensure that we were continuing to receive a competitive bid for this work. We noted another bullet here, and what we mean by this is essentially that if this project gets delayed, staff resources then will be allocated to that project at a future time that could have been spent on another future project. As we're looking to ramp up our capital program, there could be impacts to our future projects as well. There may be some things to consider as part of that. So, next slide, please, Terry. So to summarize, we're working with the county and we're evaluating our options. There is a concern of the integrity of Bolinas Road, and we evaluating essentially, we are in the middle of evaluating these three options. Of course, one of them would be the off-haul through an alternative route down through the town of Ross. The other being to permanently place the material at Bullfrog Quarry. And then the third being to delay the project. And at this time, we would not recommend delaying the project. And the next slide, I will hand off to Crystal.
Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up here. So we're continuing to develop approaches for these alternatives for topsoil off-haul via Bolinas Road. And we're still looking at the alternate off-haul routes. That's currently staff is leaning towards that route. We still have to talk to the contractor and look into a few more details regarding the feasibility of that alternate off-haul route. But we think that it is doable and it's preferable. So we also will be working to prepare a detailed change order with the contractor with the provisions that are needed to execute off-haul through that route. And then, of course, as we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, construction begins next week with mobilization of equipment to the project site and preliminary site work. So the topsoil off-haul, as we've mentioned, is scheduled to begin at the beginning of September.
Comments? Questions?
I know. I'm sure you guys probably looked over this pretty significantly, but the ability to temporarily store this dirt at Bullfrog Quarry and then at a later date be able to return it to the dump appropriately once the road gets corrected or repaired, is that even a viable option?
I can defer to Sean, who we do have on the phone to talk, but I think the main concern was as you unload the material, there's aerosol dust. So to then re-excavate it again, you imagine construction sites, they get very dusty with all the movement and equipment. So you'd actually be potentially exposing the environment to the spores twice if you were to put it in and then remove it later. Yeah.
Understood. So think of that. And if Sean, if you have anything else on that, feel free to jump in. But looking at the truck route that was currently planned before the road was compromised, that was Bolinas Fairfax Ridge to Sir Francis Drake all the way to 101 straight. So it's going to be going down the Sir Francis Drake border regardless. So we're looking at an impact change now from now like Coffin Park to Sir Francis Drake. That's the change.
That's correct. Yeah.
How confident are we at a 4-week period in terms of impact?
We're pretty confident. Like we said, when we were planning to use basically every piece of hauling equipment available for Bullfrog, and that estimates about 350 loads, ranging from 15 to upwards of 20 or more cubic yards per truck, and conservatively estimating small 7 to 10 yard trucks going through this alternative route would result in probably about double that, about 700 trucks. And we would estimate about 4 weeks, yes.
And so when you talk about the actually closing down and, assuming with that kind of vehicle traffic during the weekday, we look at almost closing the entire entrance of Valley Park. That's
Yes.
vehicle traffic, so
Yeah.
potentially pedestrian as well, or is that? Yes.
Yeah, we have actually, Sean's already starting to look into, the closure and where the signage would be placed and, daily operations in terms of opening and closing it during the workday, during the work week. But, as you know, there is a trail that, hiking trail that does go up to the left of, Phoenix Dam, that would possibly, we could keep that open to pedestrian traffic and hikers.
I definitely want to be very mindful of impacting the folks that use that recreationally, especially when we're in our really nice months weather-wise, and I know a lot of people use them, and particularly just the residents in general being impacted on that. But looking at covering up with a permeable membrane, and just look around sites around the Bay Area that have been covered up toxic stuff for a while, and people accidentally uncover it, or it's degrading property value, or it's causing problems later on down the road. And we're confident on a 4-week period to be able to eliminate this from future. I seem to think, that seems to be the way I'd like to see it go, just because this has wreaked havoc on the health of our watershed and quite frankly, areas throughout Northern California in these same environments. And to potentially spread that and only compound our job even more when we already have our hands full of dealing with this for a 4-week period. Understanding completely that's going to be an impact to quite a few residents. I just see it as a way to eliminate future problems.
And, any way that we can minimize the spread of Phytophthora, as you know, with the mortality of the trees, that causes fuel load, which causes additional costs for vegetation management and additional risks from fire. So any way that we can minimize the spread of it is probably the best option.
And thank you for the detailed report on all your options, and this is an unfortunate situation we're going to address.
Yeah, my thanks as well, Crystal and Mark. As Ben and staff know, Jed and I have already had outreach from the Fairfax Town Council about the, movement down Bolinas Road. And I think now, after this meeting, there's going to be a lot of concern in Rust. So I'd really like to work with Ben and Adrian and their staff to schedule a meeting with the Rust Town Council to discuss this, and probably Fairfax as well, just to get out in front of it. So we're not, caught with. So I would really appreciate if we could work together to schedule those meetings. The other note is there is a Phytophthora expert at Dominican University. Sean is probably well aware of this, and if there's any value in having some consultation on the risks of the different strategies, please do consider. But again, Sean, I'm guessing you're already on top of that.
Yeah, I'll just note that the phytosphere is the consultant that Mark is using in engineering is kind of the expert in this particular issue. And so we are getting the best available kind of information.
Thank you.
I'm going to just ask a couple of quick questions. In terms of the alternate haul route, I would assume that do we have any risk in the process of just hauling in a different route out through our watershed? Or are we at risk of spreading Phytophthora by loading it up and moving it down another pathway?
Again, I'll defer to Sean, but we do have the best management practices already specified in the contract for targeting and cleaning the tires and making sure there's no spread of the material along the routes that are taken. As you know, we were going to be moving material through Sky Oaks, the bulk of the excavation after, and those best management practices will be enforced for that phase of the project as well.
I just worry about the difference between us driving heavy machinery on paved roads versus on fire roads, where it'll be harder to detect if something dirt has slid off the back or through the side or something like that. But that will be a little bit harder for us to clean up and be mindful of. Do we have any cost estimates in terms of what these different alternatives will cost?
Yes, we will be coming back to the board with that cost for that number, because I'm sure we'll have to discuss it in terms of contingency.
That's a really important component for us to, I'd like to see that if we can before we make decisions.
Thanks for the comments, everyone. Thanks for the presentation. Obviously, this is difficult. I was able to go on that alternate route with Sean, almost the entire thing from the new tank placement area. I think all the way down to Alpine Lake, and I guess my comment is twofold. One is safety. This is a pretty windy, tight road. This is not a paved highway, and we were on a pickup truck, and it was pretty steep, so I get concerned. I just want to make sure that we thought through every possible safety precaution for wear and tear of having, I think you said 350 trucks going over it. So, and obviously there wouldn't be 18-wheelers, but how big would these trucks be? And I'll leave it to you guys to figure it out, but let's just triple check to make sure that this is extra safe.
Yeah, it'll probably be 10 wheelers, dumps. And, as I mentioned, we have used this route with heavy equipment in the past. After the 2014 winter storms, we had a couple of landslides on Concrete Pipe Road where we spent about $2 million installing retaining walls and making repairs. So we do keep a close eye on Concrete Pipe Road as it does host some water supply pipelines within that road.
I think I was able to talk with that one truck driver who he was going up to Bontempi, which I think is a little bit worse than where we're talking about this new route, if I'm mistaken, but there's a lot of issues with even just driving trucks all the way up there. So, you know, this is not the ideal answer.
Is our path, you've referenced that we've used the road in this for construction in the past. Have we used it for this level of intensity? I'm just trying to see whether we have a past comparative or whether whether what we're talking about is something substantially more significant.
Well, we did move 30,000 cubic yards of dirt and material for the Ross landslide repair, but that was a little shorter route, as you know, but it did go past Phoenix Lake to Natalie Coffin Green. In terms of Concrete Pipe Road, I mean, that pipeline was replaced utilizing heavy equipment. I don't know if you're construction on that, but we will certainly, be monitoring the condition and the trucks as throughout the project.
Keep in mind, it's 700 trucks, if you use 10 yard. So it's double that number. That 350 was for 20-yard trucks, long end dumps. I don't share your concern, Mark, for time. I don't understand what is driving that. I mean, the reservoirs, the steel tanks aren't going anywhere. I mean, I don't think the roof is going to collapse on them. I didn't read that in the presentation that KJ made. Maybe I missed something, but I don't feel that. This seems to me to be time to take a good deep breath and relook at this situation. I also just sent Ben a series of articles I just Googled from Oregon State, and they're talking about using bleach to sterilize this. Now, I think the volume may be the problem as opposed to the technique. There's a table in there that shows toxicity of this fungus against, or mold or whatever it is, against bleach. So there is data on that. And I'm not trying to be a backdoor Monday morning expert here, but it seems to me that needs to be thought through maybe a little more. And what can it hurt to talk to the guy at Dominican too?
Yeah, if I could just briefly, right, so we have 4 options in front of us. The plan on Bolinas, the Bullfrog, this windy route, and the delay. I'd say at this point, they're all bad options, and we're trying to figure out kind of the least bad alternative. Director Russell, in terms of the delay, part of the challenge is, as the county continues to look into this, not only do we have 3 slides, but they identified 6 other locations that they're calling sensitive or of concern. So this could be years in the making potentially before they'd be comfortable with us going in using that road. And Pine Mountain Tunnel, as you know, has been a top priority for the district for a number of reasons for quite some time. So I do believe that the two options that were presented of going this alternative route, and I do appreciate the comments, and I do want us to take kind of a second and third look at an idea. Is there a way to sterilize the material that gives greater confidence, and we are bearing something that, you know, feels okay for now, but we all know, kind of as Director Sampson noted, there's kind of an inevitability to something you bury today in terms of what happens in 10 years or whatever. So anyway, we do need to understand the cost, and Director Smith notes the practicality and feasibility of this route. And we do need to understand, is there any path for on-site that we have confidence in terms of addressing this issue and not causing degradation of the watershed? And we'll be working on both. I don't know, Sean, from all this, are there any thoughts that you have that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I'll just chime in very quick for the group, and I hope there's not too much feedback. You know, Phytophthora ramorum is what's caused sudden oak death and has had significant impacts on the watershed. Phytophthora cinnamomi is a soil-based pathogen that we're trying to be very careful not to spread on the watershed. And we're developing a lot of BMPs not to move soil around, to minimize the spread of it. It spreads very slowly on its own, 1 meter per year. It spreads mostly when you move large bulk amounts of soil. The disposal at a landfill is kind of the best management practice that we could employ in this case, and probably the most cautionary approach for managing that soil. The placement of bullfrog is, you know, at the direction of Phytosphere, which is a consultant that's done that before and used that method of burying it in a kind of impervious membrane. So that's an option and something we could think about, but it would drastically reduce our ability to use bullfrog quarry in the future. So that has been an important watershed facility in the past. So I would just say you have to kind of consider the long-term impacts as well. And in terms of hauling through concrete pipe down through Phoenix, it would be disruptive, but it's been done before. And we can come up with traffic control approaches and manage that appropriately, minimize potential impacts.
Any other board comments?
I just want to follow up and say, I think, to Ben, to your point, this has been a long time project for the district. We're at a crossroads right now where unfortunately we have to it's a decision that's out of our control. But I do think if we wait on the Salinas Fairfax Road, we'll be waiting a long time and costs will escalate. And I see a 4-week period. If we're confident with 4 weeks, that's not really a big delay in the big picture. And if we're going to be looking at everything we do in the watershed through a really focused perspective of maintaining its pristine nature right now, and then consider putting something we've been trying to fight in a section of it to bury it and make it go away, just doesn't feel right to me. So once we see the cost, I just don't think the 4 weeks is significant enough for us to delay this project anymore.
Thank you. Any other board comments?
Yeah, I think the cost is going to be breathtaking. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that 90% of US heavy industry has an on-site class 1 hazardous waste landfill on-site. So they get built all the time on factories. You know, I don't know, but it seems to me that might be an option here to over exit and put it back in the hole. I mean, you want to put a plastic liner in. I don't know about the compaction versus the reservoir. What happens then? Can you get it back to anywhere near its old compaction? I don't know what kind of soils we're talking about. But it seems to me that would, other than the permitting, would make this thing a lot more compatible with the environment. We're talking about people here, not animals. So, something to think about. I'm sure you've thought about it, but it's the first time we're here. That's at least the first time I'm here.
Okay, this is an information item, so thank you very much.
There aren't any public comments.
Public comment, thank you. Okay, moving on to our next item, which is our water efficiency program update.
Trying to move them out of the way.
Good evening, board. Carrie Pollard, Water Efficiency Manager. Terry Polk presentation here. Thank you, Terry. So this is an informational item. We'll be covering three specific initiatives. In detail, we can probably put on all of them. So we're going to start with the review of the proposed incentive changes. Then we'll move into a discussion on gray water code updates to allow for alternative compliance with the current ordinance, and then wrap up with a discussion on the development of a non-functional turf ordinance. Next slide. So starting with the first proposed incentive changes. So there's three incentives we'll be looking at this evening, starting with the high efficiency toilet rebate, then moving into clothes washer rebate. And then we have a new concept that staff's been developing or considering to develop, with some feedback on, of course, which would be a custom rebate for our commercial, industrial, and institutional customers to assist them in offering rebates to save water. So we'll take each one in turn, starting with the toilets. At the May committee meeting, Water Efficiency Committee meeting, Peter Mayer spoke to the board and presented our residential end use study, specifically looking at our flume water users. And what we have here is our toilet flush volume for those flume users. And what this graph is showing us is that our current stock in the service area, at least for our flume users, is incredibly efficient. Next slide. This makes perfect sense when we consider our toilet replacement programs that we've had in offered through the district over the last 2+ decades. Starting back in the 90s, there have been incentive programs offering with a total of 48,000 toilets having been replaced. And then there's also been 2 specific policy initiatives. The most recent was an action taken by the state of California, which restricted the flow rate of toilets sold throughout the state. And so as of 2014, any fixture that's for sale in the state of California must be a high efficiency model. So when we take into consideration the saturation rate that we saw from our flume customers and the low participation, which I didn't mention, but it's only been 2 rebates per month for this program. Even in 2021, when we had the water shortage emergency, we did not really see an uptake in participation in this program. And the saturation, low participation, et cetera, we're proposing that this program be sunset and these funds be reallocated to other programs. Next slide. Similarly with clothes washers, you can see the efficiency on the most efficient models would be on the left there. Peter did note that when he gave his presentation that the gap between the 10 and 15 range for clothes washer volume, there are likely clothes washers within that range, but they're just not being picked up. So we understand this is a perfect example that the flume data is not perfect, but it's kind of good information to help inform where we're seeing saturation and where we're seeing shifts in efficiency within the district. Next slide. This clothes washer program is also a historic program. It's been in place for almost 2 decades now. We're seeing about 8 rebates per month in the program. This one is worth noting in 2021, we did see a slight uptick in participation, and now it's tapered off back to where we were seeing pre-drought, pre-water shortage emergency. It's interesting because while there's no state regulations, the California Energy Commission does have mandates and codes and standards around clothes washers. And every couple of years when they update those standards, they are shifting the fixtures that are available within the market without requiring this level of legislation that we saw on toilets. And so when someone does finally get to the point of replacing their clothes washer, there's incredible gains on efficiency. And it's not being driven by our rebates, it's really being driven by, they go out and buy, what's on the market, which is more efficient than what they currently have. And in turn, this is resulting in a number of free riders within the program. And a free rider is a customer that will participate in our rebate program. So they'll take our funds because we have the offer out there, but they would have taken that action regardless of the incentive. And our incentives should really drive our customers to take action to be more efficient, not just allowing them to take, accept those funds because the program happens to be available. So when we take all of these items into consideration, we want to, our recommendation is to then sunset this program as well, recognizing saturation, the level of free riders, and also the low participation rates that we're seeing within the program. Both of these items were discussed at the committee meeting, and in turn, the water efficiency staff worked with our communications group to do a push around promoting these incentives. So, if we did a big push, will we get more participation in these programs? And so what we did is a month-long digital campaign where we're in 2 weeks, well, I guess now we're in the 3rd week. We have 2 weeks of data on the 4-week campaign so far. The goal of this program or this initiative was to promote the rebates, of course, but we also wanted to do a comparison of what will motivate customers to take action. We offer them one ad that is focused on money saving, so saving water saves money, and another ad focused on sustainability. Which one gets more clicks, right? We're doing this customer survey as well, and we thought, well, this is kind of a good opportunity for us to test this idea of just looking at these two comparisons, which one is more of a motivator. The third piece of this targeted campaign was looking at if we spend the time and effort to focus in on customers who own their home, right? These are the customers we want to target. They own their home. They have older homes potentially. They might be shopping for toilets or clothes washers. Those are the customers we really want to promote these offerings to. Does this in turn increase participation? So far what we've seen, we're really impressed with the click-through rate, which is more than 3.5 times the national average. So folks are seeing it, they're clicking on it. But so far we've only received 1 application from these click-throughs. So either saturation data is actually legitimate or customers is not interested in participating. Not so sure yet. But once we have a full month of data, we'll bring it back to the board and provide information on that. But it was just a good opportunity just to show how communications team is working with our team to promote all of our various actions in more innovative ways, right? How do we really get the word out there? Next slide, Terry. So moving on to this idea of a customized rebate, we recognize for our commercial customers, there's hundreds of different water using fixtures, and it doesn't make sense to have a rebate program for every single one of them. So offering a customized rebate that's based on water saving measures that aren't covered by other incentives could be a good option. Some examples of these fixtures might be food service equipment. So it could be for schools, could also be for restaurants, cafeterias, all sorts of different, anyone who's cooking food, right? Hotels, etc. Another might be irrigation improvements. So we're going to have a discussion later on around non-functional turf, but that means that our functional turf areas, our recreational areas, ensuring that they are irrigated efficient as well is very important. And so having a program that supports that would be beneficial for our customers. Another laundry equipment is another example of that. So when we consider, developing a program like this, we looked at who else is doing it. We found that East Bay Mud and Goleta Water District both have a similar type of program where they offer a specific rebate for the water savings. There's a copay, there's a measure of life that they use to determine what level of savings they would invest in, etc. There's another option, which is City of Santa Rosa does. It's different than the top two in that the City of Santa Rosa is paying for water and wastewater savings, and they will pay the rebate each month or each billing period as long as that customer is the account holder. So it's really a long-term investment that they're making for the same amount of water savings. And so we're not proposing that type of model. We're proposing more of a standard rebate with looking at copays, et cetera, for much like East Bay Mud and Goleta. So when we look at the factors for developing this type of program, we'd want to take some considerations on how the rebate would be calculated. Of course, we'd want it based on water savings, fixture life, which is the same as the measure life, and the cost not only to the customer, but also to the district. We'd want to compare those costs to our alternative water supply options, much like we do with all of our other rebate programs. What was the reasonable cost per acre foot for this investment? We look at customer cost share, much like all of our other rebate programs. We don't pay 100% of a fixture cost, right? We would want some cost share within the district or within the customer as well, potentially. The rebate program could be made in multiple installments, recognizing there's a large upfront cost for a business to make some of these improvements, so they could get an initial payment when they do the installation, and then after monitoring over a certain specific period of time, we could calculate the demonstrated water savings and provide the remaining rebate. And finally, we would consider a cap for individual customers and participation. So for example, the Goleta Water District uses $5,000 for their cap. Next slide. We also considered how would this work within our other existing rebate program, or excuse me, our other existing programs. Customers could participate as getting a cap, which is not only offered to our residential customers, but is actually offered to all of our water using customers. We could go out, look at what are the water saving potential, evaluate what those savings may be. The customer would then take action to make the installation or implement the program, whatever what they may be doing. We could issue the initial rebate, look at the monitoring plan and confirm those savings are actually being achieved before cutting the subsequent check. So we feel like there could be a good system for this type of customized rebates put into. Next slide. So funding, as I mentioned, if the toilet and the clothes washer rebate funds are made available, that would be a nice fit for something like this to roll into. Additionally, if there's other programs with lower participation and in turn, additional funding available, we could use those funds as well. So we do feel it would fit nicely within the current allocated budget that's been adopted by the board. So in summary, staff recommendations would be to return with an action item, right? This is informational, return with an action item that would sunset the toilet and clothes washer rebate program. We have an effective date proposed here is December 31st, recognizing we just did this big campaign. Ideally, customers are going to our website, seeing the list of qualifying models, making that purchase, doing that installation, and finally applying, which takes a little bit of time, right? So we want to just be able to kind of work through and make sure our customers are aware of this change we're making. And then finally, the second item would be to further develop this idea around a custom rebate to support our commercial customers moving forward. So I'm going to stop there for a moment, see if there's any thoughts before I move on to a separate item.
Could you go back to your analysis of the cost per acre foot yield?
For the other.
No.
Forward.
So forward to.
Those are the costs that East Bay Mud and Goleta Water District.
There it
and
is.
City of Santa
Thank
Rosa
you.
Are investing.
Okay, I mean, I think that those are really compelling numbers that when we consider what we've been looking at for the cost per acre foot in other projects. I think it'd be really interesting to understand how much uptake they've been getting from this, and what's the potential? Because at $327 an acre foot, that's a good cheap acre foot. So I think that would be, this is really exciting. I'll stop there to say that I would really like to see more about this, and I think it's really, I like the creativity of being flexible instead of trying to come up with the exact rebate. Let the industry tell us what they would like, how they'd like to save water, how we can support that.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. In fact, I was thinking along similar lines. If we are able to help our customers save water, then that avoids massive capital expenditures in the future. So somehow let's just be sure that we have that math calculated into our thought process, not just the cost to deliver the water, or what we pay Sonoma for it, but the savings from not having to build giant projects in the future.
The board comments? Okay, are there? Oh,
So it's all, I think we're taking public comment at the very end. I just wanted to break there before I move to the gray water code item, just
okay, great.
separate and distinct. So moving on to the gray water code update, which would allow for alternative compliance slide. Just as a reminder, in May of 2016, the board adopted a gray water ordinance, which requires the installation of a gray water system for all new service connections and all substantial remodels when a large water service is required. The substantial remodel refers to the square footage that's impacted as part of the remodel, so it's more than 50%. So it really is, walls are open. It's really kind of, a large project that these folks are going through, where this requirement is triggered. Next slide. We began tracking compliance for the gray water ordinance as currently written for about just over, 15, 16 months here. There were 272 sites that were required to comply. Of those sites, 90% did a self-justification of it, not the project installing gray water system was not feasible. You can see the justifications that were submitted there. Next slide. As a follow-up, in November of 22, we made an administrative change to how the self-certifications would be processed. We from that time on, we required that sites provide additional documentation, not to say it's not feasible for my site and just sign it. They actually have to submit something. As a result, there has been a shift in certification. So we now have 38% of the sites submit that justification to say it's not feasible. 46% have done a stub out. So a stub out is doing the indoor plumbing portion of a gray water system, but not actually sending any gray water to their landscape. So there's no water savings, but they're ready to roll if there's ever another drought or someone moves into the home that is interested in having gray water. So no water savings, but kind of that initial work has been done. And then we have 15% of sites that actually install a gray water system. Next slide. So we realized from this 15% of sites actually installing gray water system, it's likely that having, or it seems beneficial to consider other options for compliance. So staff has developed 4 separate options that could be implemented in lieu of the gray water ordinance that's currently in the books. First one would be to install drought tolerant plants in 100% of any new or rehabilitated plant areas that are associated with the project, or at least 500 square feet. Second option would be to install a gray water system. I would be interested in hearing if the step out option is something we want to retain as part of this offer or this option. We can give me feedback on that. The third option would be a rainwater catchment system that has a minimum capacity of 500 gallons. And the fourth option is using recycled water, which is already a requirement within the district code. So when we presented this information at the committee meeting, a question came up of, well, what was the impact to the customer? What was the cost to the customer for doing this type of work? So staff pulled some estimates, and it has a range for, plant materials on the low end, about $4,000 per acre foot, at a cost of $1,000 to $4,000 for the site, right? So recognizing they're in the middle of a project, right? A significant project that they're likely touching their landscape anyways, which is why there's that range. The second option is the gray water system, again, with the step out option with no water savings, so there's no associated cost per acre foot. And then the various large landscape versus complex costs are listed there. There is a simple system option, which is probably right in the middle, about $15,000 per acre foot. And then rainwater catchment cost to the customer is about $2,500. We have a savings estimated for a twice a year refill at 1,000 gallons per year. Of course, it's a really wet year like we saw this year. You'd see that fill, and that 1,000 gallons per year is this year would have been considered a low ball. Years of a drought, that would have been lucky if we would have gotten that twice a year bill. So variables there. Next slide. So in summary, staff is proposing the code changes as discussed to allow additional compliance options for the gray water ordinance. This could be developed as staff would bring back a separate ordinance that would be then considered by the board for adoption, replacing the current gray water ordinance installation, and adding these 4 options. I think that was the last slide for this section. Yes.
Thank you. Okay, board comments.
Thank you very much for putting that together, for sure. And then how many actual sites, sorry, I forget the number, so I apologize to ask the same question. How many actual sites this last fiscal year had the gray water system implemented?
So for that 16 months, we had 272 sites that should have had it installed and only 10% did. So it's almost 9 o'clock, so my brain's slow. And then on the revisions, there were 75 sites and 15% of those actually did a gray water system.
So if we go with just your first number, you have 28 actual homes, then what's the water production average for a gray water system for a home?
We have it on here, let me back up a slide, Terry.
about
It's about
4,000
4,000.
a year.
Mhm,
Okay,
4,400.
so we're really not talking about a big number significantly for much of anything, especially because the construction is just so low in this county. So I definitely think, I like the menu of options. But I think if we're actually gonna be going for water savings, we should, look to eliminate the sub out the option to do that and drive some to a different project for that. It'll be interesting to see, or hear your thoughts behind a 500-gallon water tank as opposed to something bigger for the roof catchment system for new construction.
I think we have it listed as a minimum and we'll encourage them to do whatever fits for their site, right? I mean, if there's more of an opportunity, what we didn't want to do is have such a large capacity as the minimum that it drove people away from that option.
Gotcha, that makes sense. I just think, and that does make a lot of sense. If our logo is to drive people to be able to either produce water, capture it, or reuse it another way, as opposed to just checking a box to get by a ordinance, I think we have to just have that conversation honestly with these numbers.
Thank you for the presentation, Carrie.
One more section.
Yeah.
We're so close.
Okay, no question. No question.
Okay, excellent. All right, next, the next section is the discussion on a non-functional turf ordinance. So this is the third and final section. So in March of 22, the board did adopt a non-functional turf prohibition for new installations, right? So any new landscaping that goes into non-residential, non-recreational areas cannot be turf. Also at that time, we defined what non-functional turf is, and that's included here. Next slide. The question then came up, well, what about our existing non-functional turf? And is there something that we can do to take action around expediting the replacement of what's existing non-functional turf in the service area? We have about 1.5 million square feet. Potential water savings is about 164 acre feet per year. As part of the roadmap, the strategic water supply assessment roadmap, we do have a target of 70,000 square feet per year to be replaced, which will take over 20 years to hit that 1.5 million square feet. So we looked at, are there opportunities to expedite this conversion? Next slide, Terry. So staff developed an idea around, I want to say starting with a carrot and ending with a stick, but really offering a robust incentive to drive customers to participate in this conversion program, and then ultimately landing on a ordinance that would prohibit the installation or prohibit the irrigation of existing non-functional turf with district water. So what this would look like is a robust yet declining non-functional turf rebate with the goal of motivating customers to take action now. We'd want to leverage the $685,000 in grant funding that has been allotted to the district through a Sonoma Water grant application. That grant application does assume that $1.50 would be the rebate offering. We can of course add onto that, we can offer more, but the grant will only cover 45% of that $1.50, which is about 68 cents a square foot. So, slight offset there for us. Following that voluntary incentive-driven program, we would then potentially move to a mandate which would prohibit the irrigation of non-functional turf. And it would align with the requirements already on the books for new non-functional turf as well. Next slide. We did evaluate program participation projections, and we looked at the current adopted budget to determine how much of an impact we could have with the funding we have available. There's $410,000 within the fiscal year 24 budget for turf rebates. We have an additional $700,000 that was allocated to the water efficiency budget during the budget approval process. So that could be moved to this initiative as well. The grant funding, as I mentioned, and then if there is other not utilized rebate programs, we could use some of that funding, which would be a smaller amount, but nevertheless could be available. So staff developed a sample non-functional turf rebate with each year, and as I mentioned, kind of a declining rebate, but starting off with a really robust rebate in years 1 and 2, again, to drive customers to this program. So we're proposing that year 1 would be a $6 per square foot rebate. And if we look at our current available available funding, there's 208,000 square feet that could be converted at a cost of just under $2,500 per acre foot. Of course, it would be first come, first served, because we're working within the parameters of our adopted budget. We would, of course, have rebate program requirements. It would be longer than this. As we all know, we like terms and conditions in our rebate programs, but this is kind of the meat of it, of having a site-specific strategy to maintain tree health, right? So these may not be recreational areas, but they're likely could have trees, and we don't want to have an initiative that is causing tree mortality. So maintaining tree health will be very important. We'll have them convert the overhead spray to drip, apply mulch, and only replant where it's appropriate. And we would let them determine where that would be appropriate. Next slide. Another question that came up was the ROI and payback under various rebate levels. We thought this was good information to share for a sample project, if you would, a 5,000 square foot project. We assumed the cost at $8 per acre foot. You can't see that on the bottom there, but $8 per acre foot. And we also assumed that all of the water use would be in tier 1. So anyone who's hitting those higher tiers, the payback would be even faster and the ROI would be even more robust. So if we look at the $6 per square foot level, which is the staff proposal, the payback would be 4 years and the ROI is about 80%. And then moving down to year 2, which is the $4 per square foot proposal, ROI at 60, ROI at 60 and the payback at 7. So both of those seem to be good numbers for a commercial customer to be willing to engage with us and take action. And then it just continues to decline there as we reduce the rebate amount. But the goal here is to get quick action, to get folks to take, achieve these additional water savings in a shorter time period. Next slide. So in summary, we have a recommendation that staff has developed to develop an ordinance that would go into effect in January 1 of 2028, which would prohibit the irrigation of non-functional turf on existing landscapes. We would start with implementation of a tiered rebate that would decline from over those 4 years, with the first rebate year 1 starting at $6 a square foot. We'd want to limit the rebate in year 1 to $1.1 million, which equates to 208,000 square feet. You can see the allocation there. We recognize that not all of the sites that we've identified as quote unquote non-functional turf may capture all the non-functional turf in the surface area, right? So our definition may be slightly different than someone who actually owns the building and says, no one actually ever uses that, even though you didn't do non-functional turf. We would allow those additional water savings to be pursued and incentivized through this program. We recognize that this would be potentially an enforcement, or it should be a mandate, which then leads to this idea of enforcement. Staff's proposing that we take the first 2 years and promote the rebates, see what kind of uptake we get, and then, at kind of the halfway point, evaluate, is there enforcement requirements that we need to start developing now before, or in 2026 or so, before the mandate actually comes into play. And so we've gotten feedback on the incentives. I appreciate that in the Greywater Code as well. And then finally, non-functional turf, we just saw this on the slide of it. So, but that is the end of the presentation. So thank you all for your patience.
Thank you so much. Okay, Larry, do you have any comments?
I have a couple. What is the life of grass? Do you have an idea of that? When would they be re-landscaping anyway?
I have no idea. I mean, they could reseed, they could resod.
Turf companies must know. I mean, because they keep making turf.
Right.
The other thing is, what's the reason to limit it to 1.11? Is that million? Is that the budget?
That's the current budget for turf incentives and the grant funding.
But that could be a thing. It's for me, it's a little hard to get too excited about 164 acre feet. I mean, it's not insignificant, but it's not 16,000 acre feet. So it's a little tricky. I think your caution is appropriate here in the sense that it's not end all type of things in general. I'm not so sure about the ROI calculations. I don't know. I don't know if those will sit that well with commercial real estate folks. I think they look for a little quicker return than that. I guess one way to fix that problem is to raise the price of water more, to make it pay back quicker. That's really the bottom line here, is that it's still an inexpensive commodity that doesn't pay back real quickly. You know, like you look at PG&E, it pays back pretty fast. Hard to put what the equivalent would be for PG&E, but perhaps LED lighting versus conventional lighting might be what fit that mold. Anyway, I think it's interesting. I think we have some more push to do. I'm a little concerned about picking a date like 2028 and what happens then. You know, I think we need to think through this enforcement issue a little more. It seems to me there's a way around that, which perhaps is to require a review of each large commercial property on a routine basis from a landscaping standpoint, and kind of cycle them and say, you know, you got a 5-year review coming up and you get a grade and or something like that. I think we have the horses here to do it. I don't know if we have the people to do it, but we have the intelligence to do something like that and to push it along.
Can you just clarify a little bit? We had $400,000 approved in the budget, right? And then we added 700. Is that what you said? So that's not the grant. That's 700.
Right, so that's the 1.1 is the cost to the district that's currently in the budget.
Right.
But if we multiply out $6 times 208,000 square feet, it's about $5.30.
Yeah.
Is our contribution, so the remainder is paid by the grant, but I didn't include the grant amount in our costs.
Yeah, that's, I'm sorry, the grant would be in addition, right?
Correct.
To that 1.1.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. And what's the status of the grant right now? It's Sonoma, I think, received it, and then
It's been awarded.
we're also required to match it, if I'm not mistaken.
It's been,
So,
right, it's been awarded. Sonoma Water is negotiating with the awardee to figure out how that funds will be funneled, and then they'll have to do an agreement with us. And when we did these, they think by January or so, we should be ready to roll, where we can actually have access to those funds.
that's awesome. Okay, that's great. Well, first of all, thank you for the presentation. I'm supportive of all of your recommendations. I agree that that we should be re-looking at the gray water efforts. It sounds like there's some interesting ideas that other districts have done. The incentive review makes sense to me, so I'm supportive of your direction there. And the non-functional turf makes a ton of sense to me. I think that's gonna be where we're gonna get the most savings, and I'm glad we're going after that grant money, and I'm glad we're considering matching that on top of it. My two small questions. One is that where do we stand on the water efficiency master plan? And the second is on the water loss study that you were talking about having by the end.
Yeah, so the water efficiency master plan, we have a workshop that we just scheduled for community input. Adrian can remind me of the date,
August 29th,
August 29th.
Tuesday, August 29th.
Oh, wow.
And there's an Eventbrite reminder or Eventbrite invite that's going out to the community members. Our consultant will be there to take input from members of the community, and then we'll work through the process once we kind of get to that point. We do look to have it wrapped up by the end of the year as well as planned.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yep, and the water loss study, we have a consultant on board. We've done our kickoff meeting. They're doing data collection right now, and then we're starting our internal meetings, kind of deeper dives with each of the groups that touch gray water initiatives and work within, or excuse me. It's been a long day. That work within water loss to see, you know, where there's opportunities there. So that is also on schedule.
Thank you. Perfect.
Thanks, Carrie. I think this, this is a really nice follow-on to the committee meeting that we had a couple of months ago, and brought back a lot of the additional information that we were discussing. I also support, that all of the proposals that you, put forth. I just, one question regarding the non-functional turf removal for institutions. It looks like we haven't had much experience with that type of effort to date. And if that's correct, I wonder if we've had or considered discussions with some of the very property realtors. There's not a lot of them that see the same name on basically every site that's up for rent or for sale. I wonder if we've done any type of outreach to them to get a sense of their motivations or factors that might, the likely one is, give us a higher rebate, obviously, but other considerations that might help us calibrate the program to ensure success.
We have not had those discussions, it's a bit of a balancing act. We don't want to get in front of the board taking action, but we, want to get feedback. And so I think now that we've had this discussion a couple of times, it gives us an opportunity to reach out to them and at least talk about that it's being discussed and get some feedback potentially.
So I apologize. I didn't say thanks for the presentation the first two times, but the detail that you bring back again to echo what Ron you said is much appreciated. Because I know this is quite a bit of work to do this, especially coming up with all of these possible programs. I very much support the conservation effort, especially in the commercial aspects, almost like the land we haven't gotten to yet. But I do think my first impression of the $6 is high. I think we could bring it down a little bit. It'd be interesting to see when the new rates kick in with the incentive, what would be the actual uptake from the property owners themselves with that, because I think there's gonna be some motivation there as well. And then the potential to keep some of that savings for other projects, conservation projects, keep it in the same bucket, will be used throughout the district. I think go back to benefit potentially some residential customers as well, which we could help incentivize them even more. That would be great. One thing I would like to throw in as a consideration for this piece here is that if there is non-functional turf that falls within our reclaimed water distribution area, that could be an out for the project. We're far below capacity for the reclaimed or recycled water, and folks would like to use that, continue to use that until we reach capacity. I think that's a good option to be able to have with those customers.
A couple of quick thoughts. It's just the stub out is a disappointing outcome because it doesn't yield any conservation yet. And I wonder whether there's, the cost of when a construction project, if you do the stub out during construction, there's one cost. There's another, if you have the next homeowner who comes in and goes, oh, I really wish I could install that. And then now you have a much larger cost. I'm wondering whether there is, and the stub out is better to have the stub out than none at all. But maybe it's a stub out and some sort of water efficient landscaping, but at a smaller quantity or something like that. I don't know. It would give some thought to that, knowing that there's an opportunity there when construction is going on that we might not want to miss, and we might want to figure out what the right incentive is. To not lose that, even if that current landowner or that current homeowner isn't going to take advantage of it. On the non-functional turf, I'm super excited that we are pursuing. This is something that when we made the ordinance to ban on new non-functional turf on new development, I had wished that we had gone just to really addressing the whole picture. And I think that, whether there's uptake, the volume of uptake, I think is an important metric. But I also just think that when we walk around our community and we see big grassy areas, I think that sends one signal. It's another thing when people see really well landscaped areas that are not large blocks of turf. I also can't help but thinking about the habitat value of a lot of that grass that could be butterfly habitat. So if we could have like an extra incentive that creates butterfly habitat, I know that might sound silly, but I actually really, if there's a way in which our dollars are actually going toward creating more habitat as well as obviously drought resilient landscape, I'd like to see if we can be a driver with our incentives. I agree with Matt that I think that $6 an acre foot, if we are moving toward a complete ban, might be more than what we need. I'd love this, I think honestly, if we make that commitment that we're going to phase it out, whatever that time period is, and there's an incentive program where you can get $3 an acre foot and it goes to 0 in a couple of years, people are gonna be like, wow, now's the time to do it. And so maybe by shrinking the number, we can help more square footage get into habitat.
I have a couple of things. What do you think it would take to convince the stub outs to complete? Because 46%, I mean, that's a high number. It's obviously viewed from the contractor as it's just a pain in the ass and I'll do it with no intent of ever pushing to hook it up. Along that line, I think we could think about a due on sale, forcing the stub outs to install at the point of sale. Kind of like Tiburon has with toilets. That you may not have put it in, but you can't sell the house without putting it in or without paying a penalty. It's pretty substantial, like $2,000 that you have to pay them. I think the other thing that Rajiv mentioned that's fascinating is Dick Blum, Feinstein's husband, then, but he owned CBRE. I assume that's who you're talking about, Coldwell Banker. It's the one you see most of. Dick Blum owned URS. He owned Coldwell Banker. I do not know what's the status of Feinstein's ownership. But she got it all. So one would guess she got that. They might be open to a proposal from us because of their environmental side, the company's environmental side. Dick Blum stepped down in 2014 from being the chairman of CBRE, but they're a big player in this. And again, we could institute the same kind of idea that due on sale. If you turn the commercial property, you have to do this when it's sold.
Lots of options, lots of negotiating with realtors, but yes. Potential.
Okay, any public comments?
Yes, there are two, Mr. Phil Sauter and Ed Jamison, then Marilyn Price. Go ahead, Mr. Sauter.
He's right here. That's him.
He's zooming in right now.
Thanks very much for the presentation. This has sure been a year in terms of seeing a lot more focus on conservation, and I'm really appreciative of that. I think that I'm looking forward to the day that we can not only increase the rebates for term conversion, but also offer users landscape designs that would look something like this one from a company called the Urban Water Group in Southern California. I don't know if I can pass this around or not, but I'll leave it with Carrie if I can. They say we design and construct beautiful and functional landscapes that can thrive in persistent drought conditions. Carrie mentioned two motivators for people to change their landscapes, one being savings, the other being sustainability. And I think they're both good ones. I would add a third one, which is the sizzle. I think if we can somehow get these high-end users to put in a landscape that's not only saving water, but is also a showpiece in their neighborhoods and something that makes them stand above the rest with these old green lawns, I think that would be a real motivator. I think one of the things Director Smith said really hit home for me, and that is, I think the last thing we need is a lot of new infrastructure. And if you talk about desal plants, for example, and I look at my bill and I see what I'm paying for infrastructure versus what I'm paying for water, it's night and day. The second to the last thing we need, I think, is bringing in less pristine water than we already have. We use 40% of that pristine water outdoors, and it just doesn't make sense to keep doing that. There's one other point. I think our focus really, I don't think should be so much on the 1,000 super users who we are trying to get to change their habits in terms of lawns. We need to focus on the other 59,000 hookups that don't want to keep paying for these expensive infrastructure projects. And conservation ticks the box on all of those issues. The last point, I think, is that if for some reason we're not able to come up with an effective program to replace large street landscapes, then I think we'll need to come up with a plan to support these landscapes with a system for delivering non-potable water at a price that keeps the district whole and preserves our supply of pristine potable water for the vast majority of customers for many years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jameson?
Yes, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Some of these programs have absurdly high cost per acre foot and offer only trivial potential water savings. On banning non-functional turf for potential savings of only 164 acre feet a year, I'd say the board's attention and customers' money should be focused elsewhere. And I'm skeptical about the ROI slide. It doesn't make sense to me unless it's almost all driven by an outright ban at no cost. As for laundry to landscape, 2 weeks ago, MMWD estimated the district's costs at $6,000 an acre foot, and it estimated customers' costs at about $22,000 an acre foot, for a total cost of about $28,000 an acre foot for laundry to landscape, and it likely even more than that for some customers. And anyone forced by the 2016 gray water ordinance to install a gray water system almost certainly will not actually use it. One forgetful failure to turn on a diverter valve for a laundry load with bleach could kill a bunch of landscaping. And if cleaning a filter is required, perhaps monthly, it would grow tiresome for almost anyone after 3 or 4 months, resulting in a permanent turning of the diverter valve to the sewer drain. The upshot, it is likely that almost no one actually uses this outrageously costly mandatory system that saves trivial amounts of water. The actual savings for the overwhelming majority of users is likely absolutely zero. As for the rain barrel program, in February, MMWD estimated its costs at about $9,000 an acre foot. So with a customer cost of 41,000 acres an acre foot, it's a true cost of $50,000 an acre foot for rain barrels. The board needs to end consideration of such financially far-fetched programs to inflict on its customers. The principal effect of the gray water ordinance is to just torment MMWD's customers. The district needs to abandon its enhanced gray water enforcement, and the board needs to rescind the district's ill-advised mandatory 2016 gray water ordinance. This month, the much higher customer prices were put into effect. It is now particularly important that the board demonstrates financial responsibility in considering how to spend the money, both of the district and what additional expenses it may impose on its customers in the name of conservation. The days of conservation at any cost need to end. Thank you.
Thank you. Miss Marilyn Price?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to commend you all. The more I sit in on these meetings and see the scope of what you all are working on, I can kind of rest easy that we have some wonderful people on your board that are paying attention to things. I wish more people would join these meetings, see what you're doing, and appreciate the work you're doing. On conservation, I'm going to speak more generally. What I do every day, I have a column that is an action column that is distributed to a few agencies, a few of our environmental groups. So I read all these articles that I pass on to them, and action items and studies, like there's studies for the behavior which you're trying to determine here with some of your studies on how to reach people. There's groups like the run by ACEEE, which is the Behavior, Energy, and Climate Change Group, and Yale Institute, that study people and can help recommend different tactics to take. But overall, what I'm finding is a lot of people care about the environment, but they're not doing anything. And our media is not helping. We have all of these disasters, but it's really not moving the needle. And to me, but I've had this conclusion for a long time, if we want to live within our limits here in Marin County and in the world, we need more sticks, not carrots. I applaud ordinances. I applaud things that make us do the things that we need to be doing for our future. So I'm giving you my permission. Not many people are going to agree with me, certainly not the public out there, but I think that is the direction that we need to go in. Biden needs to declare a climate emergency. We need to stop all fossil fuels. We need to do a lot of things, and that will only come about when it is required. You might need to wait a bit more till push comes to shove, but I believe that's what is needed. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, that was an informational item. So we'll be moving on now to item number 7, which is an approval item. Consider dual noticing committee meetings as special board meetings and determine whether to continue the practice.
Yes, thank you, President Schmidt and directors, Molly McLean, and the council. And this is listed as an approval item in the event that the board is interested in taking action this evening. But really, just bringing this issue of dual noticing of our committee meetings as special board meetings forward, bringing it forward to the board for consideration. This was a discussion we had back in March, there were some questions. This has been a practice of the district. Most recently, direction was provided in 2020 by the board to staff to continue this practice. Though the new board members did take some time to consider what this means, whether it's necessary or required. And in fact, it is up to the board. So I'm just opening it up for discussion this evening to see whether there's an interest in taking any different direction or sticking with the status quo.
Staff recommendation.
At this time, I don't have a strong recommendation. That this is a legal practice, and it is a preference of the board. It is an unusual practice. I did include in the staff report the option of considering a pilot project, which is an opportunity for the board and the district to shift and change the current practice to noticing committee meetings solely as committee meetings. That would mean that only 2 of the committee members would be meeting then on the dais, having the discussions. We still would anticipate that there would be hybrid participation as well as videotape available. And we could revisit it afterwards. I think without a point of reference, it might be difficult to know whether the board has a preference in one direction or another at this point. I know it was tried in the past. The board at that time didn't want to continue, but there is that option.
Molly, in the past, when this has come up, we have discussed the pros and cons of the dual noticing amongst the board. What I've never been able to get a good sense of are the pros and cons for staff. We would be open to speaking about that. I think it would also be helpful. Yes.
I do my best. I think that for staff, that some of the pros of the dual noticing means that we have access to the board on a more regular basis. It does allow us to present information equally on a more regular basis on a range of topics, and likely means that board meetings may be a more focused review. Sometimes we bring something to a committee meeting, we get a review and refer, and then we put it on consent calendar for action in the board meeting. It means maybe they're shorter board meetings. On the other hand, I would say it also creates a little bit of awkwardness having special board meetings on multiple times a month. because it isn't a usual practice, it means that there's maybe a higher level of preparedness for each of those meetings, a higher level of anticipation of just, how much inquiry and discussion. We also want to hold back from really having a recommendation from the special board meeting to a board, because it's obviously you can't not act and then refer something or recommend something to the board. So we're not bringing recommendations from a committee. It means it's a slightly different practice there. And actually, I think the general manager may have some opinion about just pros and cons that you might want to add.
Well, my opinion has kind of waned over time. And what I mean by that, when I came here, I had never seen this practice. I looked around, couldn't find others with this dual noticing practice, and it just felt unnecessary, unusual, and inconsistent with what seems to be standard governance for an agency like ours. That said, it's waned over time. I mean, I've gotten used to it, and I think it's a good question on pros and cons. I mean, even though I kind of want to, I'm hard pressed to come up with notable downsides of the current approach we have for staff. I mean, we still have packets to put together, so maybe arguably there'd be less formality at committees and there'd be more working sessions, but I don't know that fundamentally shifts workload or what staff has to do in preparation for the meeting. So at this point, very different than 4.5 years ago. It really does seem to be a policy decision, based on the considerations of individual on the board as a body of, 5 up on a dais. It looks and feels like a board meeting. Does that matter? We're getting the business of the district done really either way, and I don't see this being an impediment to it. And that would be really what I think would be most important for my.
As the only one who's been here before it was instituted, what I recall is that basically it was the same. It's a question of where you sit, not so much of being here or not being here. I was advised from Dick Hill, my predecessor, that you really needed to go to the district operations committee doc every time it was held. Because without it, you're basically hung out to dry when you come to the consent calendar. In other words, you don't have any idea when it's coming. So I'm trying to remember why it happened. It was somebody whining. I do know that about us having de facto board meetings. And that's what drove it. It was a CYA issue for the district, that there wasn't any real evaluation that I recall in terms of, what if this or what if not that. It was to fix that problem. I don't know if the problem's gone away or not. So to me, it's kind of a broke, don't fix. I don't see how it hurts anything to do this. I do understand the logic of a committee of 2. There is logic to that. But like I say, to be aware, you got to sit out there and you really cannot participate. That's the real difference. You cannot make comments. You cannot speak up. You can speak up as an individual, but not as a board member. So anyway, that's what I remember. Like I say, to me, I don't see a lot of value in changing it at this point in time.
I guess I think back to our last conversation around this, and I think one of the driving things to me is the opportunity to learn in these committee meetings, and I get that, like, if we had a committee of two and you only had two people, then the conversations might be shorter, but is that better? I mean, I think when it comes down to, you know, the more informed the board members are and the more conversations and engagement with staff that occur, because they still is pretty frequent touch. I mean, honestly, I think it's not that often that we as board members, we can't call up each other and have these conversations separately because of the fact prohibits that. So these meetings become the opportunity to have conversations on these topics, and I learn a lot. And I know that maybe it is a little bit more work, you'll notice them. But I think that there's a lot of educational value in it, that the more we learn, the better we are able to serve, and the better we're able to strengthen and be an asset to the district. So I'm not recognizing or hearing a significant downside. I feel like there's a strong educational upside. Again, still relative to the newness of a lot of I'll even say it myself, but you know, I still feel like I'm learning a lot when I come to these meetings. So that's kind of sense.
You know, I've talked about this before about being a proponent of actually committees doing the committee work and coming back to the board with recommendations. And one of the things I feel comfortable about that is that there's very lucky to serve with some very intelligent people with a wide variety of backgrounds that can specialize, and I trust everyone's opinion here when we're bringing it forward. With that being said, I feel like there's a workload that's greater than normal with the water supply study piece, and we're about to touch base here on the recreation management plan. And I think these are decisions that we should all have our ability to weigh in at, in a way, to your point, Monty, and the ability to question and answer before we move to a full presentation of the board. So I think at this time for me, I feel more comfortable. It's going to sound like a punt, but moving this decision probably to the calendar year 24, and let's get through some of these big pieces and see how we're doing, see how we feel.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot in the last week about how much progress this board has made in 7 months. I think it's pretty astonishing. We've approved a roadmap for water supply and storage. We've approved the historic rate change, our cost of service. We're hopefully completing a union negotiation for the first time since 2011. We have a watershed use and recreation study that hopefully will be done for the first time since 2004 this fall. One thing after another, we are moving. I think it seems like at lightning speed compared to what has happened historically. And I think to a large extent, it's because we're all in here talking through and we're learning and we're moving and we're like making decisions. So I find these probably a bit laborious, but probably the most effective way to help drive some of these moves as fast as possible. I'm not convinced it's a good long-term practice. And I do think that each of the committees should discuss whether they want to have it be this way. I don't think they all have to do it. So I'd be supportive of approving continuing the practice, and I think we should revisit it on a committee by committee level. Let's call it in January.
I think one thing that needs to be thought through is having, as I said, the only person here who's been with it both ways. What happens is these summaries that Terry does are great. And it's something I push for very hard because the public doesn't necessarily have this input. It's better now since Bragman put in the video. It's an option. But the problem is that you end up doing it twice. That's the reality. Is when you get into a sticky issue that's being discussed, it doesn't go on the consent calendar. The purpose of the committees is to allow an in-depth presentation discussion of the information so that the board meetings aren't 15 hours long.
Hmm.
And if any of you have never attended the Larkspur City Council meeting, it's something I would strongly recommend you do. They routinely go till 3 a.m, routinely. And if your item, which we have been there for the water district, you sit there for 8 hours to make your presentation at 3 a.m. That's the problem with the other model. When you have everybody sitting here, you do that investigation. Now, probably we could change the policy on making decisions in the committee. I mean, you do have a full board. You could do that. I think either way is okay there, you know. That's an interesting one. But I think as far as time efficiency, it's like pay me now or pay me later. The other board members are not going to be satisfied with a broad brush overview of 2 of the board members to drive the direction. That's what I will observe. So like I say, what you end up doing is instead of being on the consent calendar, it has to be rediscussed, which is arguably, in my opinion, harder on staff than just doing it once within the full board in the committee than it is to have a small group and have to repeat it all.
Yeah, I think I might have gone through a bit of a similar process as Ben, but in 6 months rather than 4 years when I started. And I think both because of the optics around Google Notice meetings and my concern about the time requirements for doing that, I was feeling like, you know, something that we should transition out of relatively soon. But I think the positives of having the joint meetings that have really now come to the front. And Larry, just on your point of going through, like experiencing the discussions in the committee meeting and then having that opportunity to revisit them forward. And I'm somebody that probably needs 2 or 3 rounds before I actually understand it. So there's a lot that does make me feel more better informed and ideally in a better position to make decisions. So, you know, I think I really come to appreciate that process, and I think also just being able to spend time, you know, as a group that has a lot of value to me.
Well, we have, as I said before, and I think we're all aware, a special situation. This is unique to the board. It never happened before to replace 3 board members at once. I won't say never, but pretty close to never. And I think as Monty recalls, we were in a situation where our board meetings were routinely pushing into 11 at night. During COVID especially. And they were pushing so long that frankly, I started getting sleepy. And I don't get sleepy. Not because of the level of activity wearing me down, it was boring. And I started drifting, you know, thinking about other things. Easier to do when you're not here, obviously. So, like I said, I think it may appear to be more efficient. It's definitely more conventional, I'll agree with that. But I don't know that it is actually more efficient because the problem, like I say, is you just regurgitate it again. And we have that ability now to take an item off of the consent calendar, but which means that basically staff is standing by, waiting for our whims, a decision about whether we want it off to be discussed or not. So they have to stand by. I mean, perhaps that's something we could be more efficient to find out if that's going to happen or not, so they don't have to stand by. The other question I have, Molly, is Mimi has been the one that has complained about this. Is there any validity to her complaint?
It's my understanding, Director Russell, that there were objections raised. I think Amy Willard has voiced some concerns in the past. I don't know if it was part of the cost group or independently. But there were letters written about whether or not this practice was compliant with the Brown Act.
Even the threat to sue, as I recall.
I believe so. I wasn't here at the time, but I have reviewed those. It's been a little while since I looked at those. But feel comfortable, based on everything that I reviewed, the referrals to the district attorney's office that were never picked up, the research and analysis by outside counsel, on whether or not this practice of dual noticing is consistent with the Brown Act, and everything points in the direction of yes, we have the right under the Brown Act to notice a special board meeting as long as we post 24-hour notice on the agenda and we follow the agenda. We take the extra step as a district. The board has decided in part of its policy that it will do its best not to take action at those meetings so that those don't become de facto board meetings every single time. We do have discussion. We don't actually receive recommendations when we have a forum. So we're trying to be very careful to walk that line and find that balance. But I feel comfortable that the practice is compliant with the Brown Act, and I don't have any concerns about continuing if that's the wish of the board.
And I think Mary Casey delved into this very heavily.
Yes.
I guess one could argue that referring to the board, even though it's not voted on, in essence, occasionally things come off the consent calendar, but not very often. So it kind of is a de facto vote.
It is sometimes, I think, a fine line, but, and you know, the concern that I have is that it not be confusing to the board or to the public. It is placed on, it is a review and refer. There is not a formal vote of the full quorum of the board. It is placed on the consent calendar, but as you indicated, any board member could call it off, and members of the public can still come and comment on that consent item, can still participate in the meeting regarding that item. So being on consent, yes, there's some efficiencies, but there's no guarantee that it's not going to be discussed.
Okay, so I think, do I have a motion with it? I feel like where we're landing is
I'll make a motion that we continue to approve the practice. At least until January.
Okay. Are there any public comments?
There are none.
Okay, with that, vote.
Yes. Vice President Kush,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Sampson,
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
and President Schmidt.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings the last agenda item, future meeting schedule.
Good evening. We'll have our next board meeting next Tuesday, August 1st. Then the week of August 15th, there are 3 meetings. Another regular Board of Directors meeting, the Communications and Water Efficiency Committee meeting, and the Operations Committee meeting. Next week, there are 2 external meetings. I'm sorry, only one. August 4th is the NBWA meeting, which they'll be doing both a Zoom and in-person meeting, which will be at Napa Sanitation District. Then on Monday, August 7th is the Sonoma WACTAC meeting at their normal, at the regular business location. And that's it.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. And I think with that, that's our last agenda item, and we will be adjourned. Have a good evening.
Good evening.